Thank you, Mr. President, and it's great to continue in my remarks on this bill. I had a very short period before question time where I was trying to explain in that short period how I just don't know sometimes whether the Labor Party has a full understanding and conception of the English language. I was listening to Senator Singh's contribution to this bill before question time, and she continued to characterise— Sorry, Mr. President, are we— OK, sorry. Had a little bit of confusion there in the melee after the division. Senator Singh, as I was saying, was trying to characterise this bill and the changes envisaged in this bill as cuts. But in fact, what this bill does is permits the SBS to have a little more flexibility over its advertising revenue and raise some more additional money for its budget and for its spending. It has actually nothing to do with cuts whatsoever, and it did remind me of previous Labor Party redefinitions of words of the English language. I remember in the budgets that they passed, well, they had about 6 budgets in the Rudd-Gillard government, and I remember in the budgets there they often would propose or present that they had delivered billions of dollars worth of savings. So, for example, in the 2012-13 budget, they proposed that they had $33.6 billion in savings in 12-13, and then they go on to say, when you read the fine print, that less than half these savings decisions, so less than half of the savings in this budget, are from changes in tax receipts. So, what they're actually saying there is just under half of their savings were actually from tax increases, not from actually savings; they were tax increases. And that's exactly their approach in this bill here. They're trying to characterise what is actually trying to give SBS more revenue and more resources as a cut. It's consistent with their approach elsewhere to obfuscate. Now, on one of the reasons that the SBS has to try and find other revenue sources is, of course, because we do not have the benefit and the flexibility of a stable and secure budget position like we had when the coalition last left office. Over 6 years, in those budgets I referred to, the Labor Party accumulated $240 billion in debt in just 6 years. It was a time of profligacy not seen outside of wars in Australia's history. We did not have a recession. We continued to maintain moderate levels of economic growth through that period, but we still racked up $240 billion in debt. And when you have now the accumulation of $240 billion in debt, we have more than $300 billion of debt now on the books, we are going to have to look for other ways of funding essential services and services that we want to provide to the Australian people. That's what any sensible government would do. We have to try and find how we can continue to fund things that we want to continue to support, and I certainly want to continue to support the good work that SBS does. Any household would do, Mr. President, exactly the same. If they had a bit of an increase in their debt, an unforecasted and unexpected increase, which it certainly was because the Labor Party never did forecast these deficits, despite the fact they arose, they would look to find other ways of bringing income into that household to at least partially offset the deficit, and that is all that this bill does. And I will go to the detail of it later, but it's a very reasonable and sensible change to help fill that gap. And as I said, I do want to support the work of the SBS. I myself have an Anglo-Saxon name or an Irish name, but on my unlike Senator Xenophon who is fortunate enough to have a name from a southern European country. My mother had a name from a southern European country, although not Greek, but Italian. And I remember as a young child, when Nono used to come and visit, he would turn the Italian news on in the morning, and he was a little bit hard of hearing, so not only could he hear it, but it would all wake us up throughout the house, and we could hear what was going on in Italy, not that I could understand a word of it. But it does provide an essential service to particularly newly arrived migrants to our country. It helps them become integrated within Australia and feel like they are part of Australia. I think it is a fantastic thing that Australia has a service like SBS. From my understanding, it's one of the few. We are one of the few countries in the world that has a dedicated public broadcaster to multilingual services and to migrant communities. And it is fitting that we are one of those countries, because we are a proud multicultural country that has drawn people from all parts of the world to make up a strong and stable nation. And the SBS are a very important glue in that stable nation to hold it together. So I do want to support it. I want to make sure it continue to provide those services. We must, of course, realise that in an environment where most other countries actually don't have the money or resources to fund a dedicated public broadcaster for these purposes, that it will be a challenge to continue to find the resources to do this going forward in strained budget circumstances. Now, I think we can continue to do that. I hope we do continue to do that, and an essential element of ensuring that we continue to do that is to allow the SBS to raise revenue from advertising purposes and not draw on the public taxpayer. Now, both sides of politics have supported SBS raising money in this way over history. That is not a controversial element of SBS's current governance structure or current budget. Indeed, going right back to the inception of the SBS in the late 1970s under a coalition government, it was given the power, it was given the ability to receive money for program sponsorship, not advertising per se, but some form of commercial and outside funding. In the late 80s, decisions were made under a Labor government to expand that to include the sale of advertising time, and particularly during the 1990 FIFA World Cup, and that was it was actually hosted in Italy too, and it was a success, and that was expanded over time. And in the late 1990s, greater flexibility was given to SBS to fund to take advertising dollars, and that has proven a great success and has helped underwrite the many good shows and content that the SBS creates. Right now, SBS, and it's been the case for a number of years, SBS is permitted to show 120 minutes per day of paid advertising content. And wait for it, shock horror, the changes that this bill actually proposes, this controversy apparently that we have now in this chamber, where some seek to oppose the radical changes we're proposing. Apparently they're radical and potentially will create a whole new monster in SBS, or apparently create a fourth commercial television network. The sky will fall in. Australia will no longer be the country it once was. So just hold on exactly what we are doing in this bill to bring about these radical and groundbreaking, world-changing effects. We're going to allow SBS. Currently, they can do 120 minutes per day. We're going to allow 10 minutes more per hour, I believe, is the change. 5 to 10 minutes per hour, sorry. I'm just trying to read my notes here from before. But we are not going to change. We're not going to change the total amount of hours that SBS can change, can show in a day. It will remain at 120 minutes per day. And I've just checked, sorry, I apologise, Mr President, it currently is 5 minutes per hour, and we're going to allow SBS to increase that to 10 minutes per hour. So currently they have to spread that 120 minutes equally over the day at 5 minutes per hour. We are radically proposing that we give them the flexibility to allow them to take advertising 10 minutes per hour, but still keep a cap of 120 minutes per day. Right? That's a radical change that apparently is going to bring the sky falling down upon us. It's still under the 14 to 16 minutes per hour that commercial broadcasters are capped at showing, and they are permitted to show 350 minutes per day, and SBS, as I've said, will still remain at 120 minutes per day. Of course, because this is a small an extremely sensible and reasonable change to SBS's approach to paid advertising. It's not going to raise an enormous amount of money. SBS say that it will raise around $28.5 million. I do recognise that other estimates, particularly from the free-to-air TV industry, say it'll be much higher, and I'll go into those in more detail. But even when you take SBS's figures, the source, the proportion of funding, of their funding that will come from paid advertising under this proposal will rise, or is expected to rise, from 26% to 28%. Again, apparently a radical change that's going to somehow completely change our broadcasting landscape if you listen to the contributions on the other side of this debate from the chamber. Now, really, the only substantive argument that is put by those people against this change has been that somehow that because the commercial TV industry are upset at this change, we need to listen to those concerns and not make the change ourselves. That's about the only argument. The only argument that's been put forward against this, the substantive one, on the specific changes being proposed, is that the commercial TV industry aren't happy. And it is true that some of them are not happy, and therefore I'd like to deal briefly with some of the issues they've raised and in my view, dismiss the veracity of these claims. SBS at the moment is not a mainstream broadcaster. It's a niche broadcaster by definition. By definition, it is never going to earn large shares of our national audience. It's not intended to. The reason we have it is to provide services to Australians that may not be yet, at least, in what would broadly be characterised as the mainstream of our society, and it's a right and proper thing that we do that. And SBS should be focused on providing services to those viewers, which is always going to mean that it will not carry or attract a great share or a great proportion of the viewing audience. At the moment, it attracts around 5% of the national audience, and that is not a figure that's growing in any great way, and I don't expect it to grow. That's not the SBS's charter or approach. Its approach is to provide services to a niche section of our community, not to try and grow its audience, like other commercial broadcasters obviously would try. That means that because it only gets 5% of the national audience and it's restricted in how much paid advertising it can show, it currently only gets around 1.4 to just under 2% of the advertising budget, the commercial TV advertising budget. The total commercial TV advertising market at the moment, well, in 2012-13, it's $3.8 billion, and in 2013-14,
Senator Canavan,
it
the
was
time being 7:20, it is now
billion.
proposed to Senator June.